to get through in hopefully in half an hour. And so I know some of you are going to be coming in and out, which is great. So again, my name is Chantelle George, and today is the day. The title of my dissertation is The Secret Sauce, a phenomenological study exploring the experiences of community-based organization professionals who support students of color from underserved communities through post-secondary completion. So again, I want to thank my committee chair, Dean Roland Mitchell, and my committee members who've been so supportive along the way, Dr. Ashley Clayton, Dr. Jennifer Curry, Dr. Richie Roberts, and Dr. Keith Zander. Okay. I also want to acknowledge my family who have been also super supportive in this process. Me standing in front of you today, it was not by myself. It took a village to get me to the finish line over the past 4 years. And so I wanted to acknowledge my family who some of them are actually on the call today. So want to acknowledge all of you. Also want to acknowledge Mojo's Coffee and Magazine Street in New Orleans and Java Coffee in Costa Rica, where half of this dissertation was written. So want to give a shout out to those two coffee houses as well. And then also a slew of close friends and family as well who have been supportive along this journey of this process. Okay, so I'll go through a brief overview. First, give you a lens into the study. Obviously, I'll kind of go through the beginning of this fairly quickly, the introduction, going into the methodology, and I'll spend quite a bit of time around the findings that I uncovered throughout this study, and then conclusion. And then there'll be an opportunity, obviously, to debrief and ask questions at the end. Okay, so wanted to start high level, as I would say, the state of the union when it comes to post-secondary education. So as we know, there are going to be more than half of the jobs needed in the US, starting actually in 2025, will require some sort of post-secondary degree or credential. Quick note, I can hear when people are coming into the room. And so I'm not sure, Dean Mitchell, how we can connect. I'm sorry, team. I just want to make sure we get this right. So I can hear people coming into the room. Okay. And so again, by 2025, 65% of all jobs in the economy will require post-secondary education and training beyond high school. In addition to that, what we do know is that there are more and more individuals who are enrolling into post-secondary education, but there's still a massive gap in between, specifically when we think about students of color and socioeconomic status. So wanted to kind of show where we are currently. As you can see through these graphs, the percentage of 25 to 29-year-olds who are either pursuing or graduating with a high school diploma, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, et cetera, or there is a significant gap when we look at these students, specifically Black and Latinx students versus their white affluent counterparts. And so the statement of the problem and what we were trying to uncover today is that we know that we are lagging behind the jobs that are needed, that are going to require a post-secondary credential. We also know in the literature that there's a heavy emphasis on attrition and melt. And so many of you who are in the field today can potentially attest to that. There's a lot of literature when we think about students of color, students from low-income communities, underserved communities who are getting through or trying to get through the finish line. A lot of the literature is around what they didn't do, the attrition, the melt, why they dropped out. And so I really wanted to focus on the opposite side of that, or the students that actually completed, and what can we learn from them. Again, a lot of the motivators and influencers around post-secondary completion in the literature are also very connected to the institution. So what's actually happening at the institutions? What are the programs at the institution that are supporting students, as opposed to not much literature around what's potentially happening external or adjacent to the institution. So very little data about community-based organizations in particular, and the support that they provide students to and through. So the purpose of this study is to examine post-secondary completion of students of color from underserved communities from an asset-based perspective, focusing on motivators from outside of the institution. The motivator for this study was looking at community-based organizations and specifically the staff that work there to support these students. I explore the lived experiences of CBO staff to discover the what and how they support this student demographic and what their perspective of the secret sauce is. And so my version of the secret sauce is, what is the solution? What do they believe the solution is to post-secondary completion when it comes to this demographic of student? So my research questions, here are the two research questions that I grounded in for this particular study. The first one is, how do CBO staff describe their experience in supporting students of color from underserved communities to post-secondary completion? And then the second one, what are the forms of cultural wealth that CBO staff identified as valuable for post-secondary completion for this subgroup of students? And so anchored in these two questions, you will see these two questions come back throughout the presentation, but the study was really grounded in really trying to answer those two questions. So a quick spill again around the literature review. As I mentioned before, we know that more students are enrolling into post-secondary education. We also know that there is still currently a gap across race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. Again, there's a high emphasis around attrition and MELT. We know that the motivators and influencers that have shown impact in regards to retention and completion are very focused on what's happening in the institution as opposed to what could potentially be happening outside of the institution. And a lot of the research in regards to programming are heavy around federally funded programs. So there's a lot of research around TRIO, Gear Up, et cetera, which are amazing programs, but not as much literature, a very, very limited literature in the higher ed research, specifically around nonprofits, community-based organizational work. And then some of the motivators that we know to be true that's in the literature around peer and faculty support, living on campus, student involvement, pre-college programs, all of these are in the literature as motivators and influencers, and what we know to be true as students are participating in these and how they've helped them along the way. So a quick spill around the literature review and what I uncovered as I was looking through the literature to prepare for this study. Okay, so getting into the fun stuff, this is the theoretical framework that I anchored in, Dr. Tara Yosso's Community Cultural Wealth Framework, CCW for short. This framework, I chose this framework in particular because it really focuses on the asset-based perspective of students of color. And so it really leans into what are the cultural knowledge, skills, and abilities that these students already have, right? This is what they already possess, and what does that look like as they are bringing this into social institutions? And in particular, this social institution would be the institution of higher ed. And so these are the 6 capitals. I will be going through these later, but just wanted to give you an eye into Dr. Tara Yosso's model, and we will come back to this as we get to the findings. All right, so community culture of wealth, of course, in typical Chantelle fashion, she met Dr. Tara Yosso along the way, who has been super helpful in this study. And so I had the opportunity to really understand the model from the person itself. And so I thought that this was a really neat way that she described the model and how we should think about it. It is seeing the barrier as the structure, not the student, that is the shift. It is not just the cultural wealth, but the means by which they access this wealth. In your case, meaning in my study, the CBO is the means by which we hope students can recognize that they are coming with something and can access cultural wealth. So I wanted to share that. I thought it was a really good synopsis of how we should think about the student, specifically the first part that's very powerful. It is the barrier as the structure and not the student that is the shift. Okay, so going into methodology, I'm sure many of you have heard me say phenomenology for thousands of times throughout the past couple of years. I have just figured out how to pronounce phenomenology, but it is the methodology of choice. In our literature, there are 2 main phenomenologist scholars, Moustakis and Van Manen. I opted to lean into Moustakis's phenomenology perspective, specifically looking into a transcendental phenomenology, but the goal of phenomenology is to detail the meaning of an experience, both in terms of what was experienced and how it was experienced. And so for this study, I'm really looking into the lived experiences of CBO staff, how they're experiencing, what they're experiencing, etc. And a transcendental phenomenology is an approach by which the researcher seeks to describe the essence of a phenomenon by exploring it from the perspective of those who have experienced it. So really looking at what the phenomenon is, what is the shared experience that these individuals are having, and then the essence of that. So how are they experiencing this as well? So that is the methodology in regards to transcendental phenomenology. I will take us to data collection. And so I used purposeful and snowball sampling to find participants for this study. As I mentioned before, it was really important for me to really find community-based organization staff that worked directly with students. And so the criteria is in front of you. I was really adamant about having direct service CBO staff for this particular study. We didn't accept individuals that were, for example, executive leadership, C-suite individuals. We really wanted to talk to those who are working as proximate to students to really understand their experience and how they've been able to support them. And so we focused on those CBO staff who are currently in those positions or had been within those positions within the past 5 years. We also ensured that the community-based organizations that they were serving were at least serving over 50% of students of color for underserved communities, and that they were focused on both on access and success in particular. So again, community-based organizations that supported students all the way to the finish line was what I was concerned about in this study, and so wanted to share what the criteria actually was. So I had the opportunity to interview 16 community-based organization staff from across the country who met this criteria. And I did that through a series of one-on-one semi-structured interviews via Zoom. So this is a snapshot of the participant profiles. Again, 16 participants from across the country, 14 women, 2 men. So 14 identified as women, 2 identified as male, 5 participants identified as white, 11 identified as people of color, and 12 identified as low income, meaning they were recipients of the Pell Grant while they were in college. And so wanted to share what the participant profile turned out to be, and I'll come back to some of this in the findings as well. All righty, so the data analysis process, I again used Moustakis's steps for the data analysis process, which is here. It may look a little foreign to some of you, but I used a modified version of his 5-step process. The only step I didn't do was imaginative variation, and I will get to that in the limitations. But did qualitative coding. I used Deduce as my software and spent the entire summer coding 16 interviews, which takes quite a bit of time, right? And so that was my coding and analysis process. I began with epoche, which is bracketing for bias. And so this process really tries to eliminate as much bias as possible. As someone who is familiar with the field and coming into this study, I wanted to ensure that I was bracketing as much bias as possible. It is impossible to bracket all the bias, but and I did that by having a peer reviewer really look at all of my interviews and transcripts as well, who was unaffiliated with the study. And so that's how I was able to really try to bracket the bias. And then going through phenomenological reduction, which is the open coding, multiple coding process that I used. So again, really looking at all 16 interviews, all of their transcriptions, coding or significant statements, as Moustakis would name it. So looking at significant statements and really deducing that down to categories and clusters, and really trying to create and see where there are some differences and similarities to what 16 people are saying about this topic. And so going through that process, going through that iteration multiple times to get really to the what and how of the phenomenon. So really being able to understand the what and how of their lived experiences as supporting these students through the finish line, and then eventually getting to the essence of the phenomenon through, in this particular study, 3 emerging themes. Okay, so the synthesis process, the meat of this, what is the essence? So based on the phenomenological approach, the phenomenon of this study was the support that CBO staff provided to this demographic of student. The essence of the phenomenon, so the how they were able to do this, really landed into three emerging themes, and it's how the staff supported these students and what their definition of the secret sauce was. So these are the three emerging themes that I will then get into. The three big emerging themes that came out of the findings were as followed. So CBO staff have enabling conditions to effectively support students. CBO staff use a set of strategies to be successful in their role. And what is the secret sauce to post-secondary completion? Okay, so the results are in, and we will get to all of these findings. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, team. So theme one, as I mentioned before, CBO staff have enabling conditions to effectively support students. Participants named two things in particular that they believe that they needed and had to have in order to really be effective in their roles, in order to really live into the space to effectively support students. And both of those things were participating in professional development and training, and then also really understanding the student's lived experience. So professional development and training for CBOs is not a one-size-fits-all model, which was evident through the participants' experiences. Professional development, or PD for short, range from opportunities that existed through the CBO, but also existed externally outside of the CBO. Most participants relied on professional development that was available to them outside of the CBO. So wanted to name that as well. So for example, Nina, who is a director of student support from Chicago, expressed her CBO invested $500 into each employee for professional development, but did not have opportunities within the organization. And so Nina recounted, although the CBO provided funding, it did not have PD opportunities set up internally. Instead, CBO leaders, so the leaders of that organization, simply relied heavily on highly competent people to do well in their jobs. In addition, Nina shared that most of the staff, including herself, found PD opportunities externally. She recounted the impact that these external trainings had on her work. So she says, I had to go find all of the trainings on my own. I invested in motivational interview training and mental health training through a nonprofit in Chicago. It has been so very helpful in increasing my capacity to ask my students open-ended questions, and even if that means sitting in silence with the student while they're trying to figure it out or helping them in moments who may be in crisis, these trainings truly help transform my coaching practices and check-in sessions. So an example of how our participant really leaned into an opportunity in regards to external professional development and training. Like Nina, Molly, who's a practitioner from Cincinnati, explained her professional development experience while in her CBO role. She also relied on external professional development opportunities. Molly described her experience with the National College Attainment Network, a professional association practitioners are a part of when it comes to college access and success. And she says, I sought out a lot of support through NCAN, through both formal paths of going to conferences and webinars. These opportunities allowed me to meet other practitioners in the field, present at conferences, and I learned about student support from other organizations. This really helped me bring back tools and resources to my organization and better support students in my cohort. Okay, so moving to the second sub-theme, which is about understanding students' lived experiences. Participants recounted understanding their experiences as essential to them being able to support them and for them having success. And so they discussed their own identities as value in understanding their students' experiences. So I just wanted to go back and put this information in as we spoke about before. Most of the participants that I interviewed had some sort of connection to the student. Either they identified as a person of color or identified as low income, which was directly aligned to this theme and how they were able to support them along the way. So King, who is a coach based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, shared his ability to understand students' lived experiences. King identified as a Black male who has had experience working at historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And he says, I worked at Southern, I worked at Morehouse, and now I'm at an organization that's focused on students who want to enroll at HBCUs. I understand the journey of my kids. I know HBCUs like the back of my hand. I am able to navigate HBCUs and can give my students knowledge and expertise. I am able to let them know how they can navigate the system and how to get the support that they need. And then Faith, a student support coach in New Orleans, Louisiana, shared that her age and Pell eligible status helped her understand students' experiences. So she shares, I really do think they just need a listening ear and someone that knows them and truly supports them. Me coming from a similar background of having the Pell Grant and being close in age and experiencing college just because I got out 2 years ago, I know them and understand them. This is what is helpful in coaching them beyond the challenges that they are having. So again, this idea around participants really diving into their own lived experiences and that being essential to how they support students. In contrast, there obviously were participants who did not share the lived experiences of those students. Molly, who identified as a white woman, shared her experience of not having the same lived experience as her students. Molly, a talent search advisor from Cincinnati, Ohio, shared the importance of practitioners who identify as white and serve students of color, and the importance of understanding their lived experiences and knowing the training that they need to better support these students. And so she shares, I think for me as a white woman, connecting primarily with students of color and specifically Black or African-American students, I really had to think about how I showed up in the space. I think it's really tempting and common for white folks to co-opt Black culture, Black language in those spaces. So it was really important for me not to do that, but to show up and learn about their journey. All righty, so moving to theme 2, which is CBO staff use a set of strategies to be successful in their role. 2 sub-themes emerged out of this particular section. One is all participants named how they were able to navigate and help students get through barriers and challenges. And then all of them also mentioned some form of connecting students to key stakeholders as strategies that they used to be successful. And so when asked about barriers that students encountered through post-secondary education, there were 2 in particular. Mental health and navigating racial climates were the top challenges that participants indicated and spoke about how they were able to support students through these 2 particular challenges as well. So Nina explained the conflict between a student who identified as a Black woman at a PWI, predominantly white institution, and her white female roommate. The conflict was escalated to the residential advisor on campus and later to the police. Nina explained the lack of support her student received from the institution and how she used her coaching to support her throughout that conflict. So Nina says, I continue to support and coach my student throughout the process. I helped her draft emails to campus staff and scenario plan on what to do post the police report. But by that time, the damage had already been done despite the fact the police were involved. She decided that this institution was no longer safe and ended up transferring. So an example of how Nina was able to coach the student throughout that process of navigating racial climates. In regards to mental health, so Power recounted her experience serving as a success coach in Milwaukee, saying a lot of my students deal with anxiety, a lot of them deal with depression. I have students that have been diagnosed with bipolarism and schizophrenia. She later expressed her experience in supporting students during their post-secondary journey. She says, mental health is extremely important. Often students would come to me and share that they felt isolated and alone, especially during COVID. I often encourage them to go to the counseling service on campus or see a therapist. At our organization, we use the BetterHelp app for our students. Students would log in and find a therapist for free on the app. Even students that did not identify or did not need support used the app to make sure they were in a safe space. And so for Power in particular, there were some resources embedded in the CBO that they were able to use to support students who were struggling with mental health. And the second piece is connecting students to key stakeholders on campus. Participants believed in the value of having strong relationships with key stakeholders on campus and how these relationships supported students along their post-secondary journey. Magic shared her CBO has designated staff to connect students to key stakeholders on campus. Her CBO have directors of post-secondary partnerships, whose main role is to build partnerships with institutions to identify key staff to support CBO students. She explained, having someone like a retention liaison or a campus support person that our post-secondary partnerships team specifically can sit down and work with is key. We bring students to these liaisons and campus support people so that they know where these offices are, and if they ever need help or support, they know where to go to. What I can say is there are always people who are actively helping our students. And so an example of how, for this particular situation, the CBO has designated staff that really help students find who those key stakeholders are. Participants shared their process of finding key stakeholders, and oftentimes the challenges that come with identifying and having a building relationship with someone on campus. And so Krista recounted her experience in Cincinnati. The advisors that worked within the high schools were clearly huge resource centers and huge advocates and stayed connected with students when they were in their initial years of college. Then we worked really hard to build a network of support on the college campus, and students would know. She went on to say, this is your champion here, and they are going to help you, which is both great and entirely unscalable and unsustainable because that person leaves. We found it difficult to transfer that relationship and that social capital and relational trust. Where does the support go when your champion leaves? It's a tricky thing to navigate. How do you create a sustainable relationship? We are all still figuring this out. So that is from Krista. Okay, so theme 3, the secret sauce to post-secondary completion. I asked every participant what they believed the solution to post-secondary completion was based on their experience. And it was fairly unanimous around students needing a sense of belonging, specifically by building community, and even more specific by aligning themselves to either affinity groups and cultural centers on campus and having the trusted adult. So I will dive more into this. As I mentioned before, the final theme that emerged was theme 3. Unanimously, participants indicated students having a sense of belonging through some form of community building, and again, through affinity groups, cultural centers, and the trusted adult on campus. So I'll get through affinity groups and cultural centers. So Grace, a program director in St. Paul, Minnesota, spoke about a student who was a junior and a part of the Latinx affinity group at her campus. One of my students is graduating from USC, specifically said that without the Latin American and Educational Services Center, she would not be graduating. Grace then described what the student shared about the center and how it helped her during her college experience. Grace recounted the students shared the following in their coaching session. I wouldn't be graduating from USC right now without the help of the Latin American Center. They gave me the opportunity to attend leadership trainings. I attended a really cool lecture on power and privilege. We helped organize a George Floyd conversation on campus. And in the summer, I did a 2-week engineering program with other Latino students. Like Grace, Power also gave credit to cultural centers as a valuable resource for student success. She says, so many of them mentioned our dean and our cultural center. My students built a great relationship with him. They were able to find community and a mentor in him. They told me they would go to the center a lot and just hang out with friends or use it as a place to study. There were a lot of older students in there, so a lot of freshmen could ask questions and ask them, what do you do? What do you suggest I do? Or who do I talk to about this? Or they'll just vent. It was a place where they could escape to. So in addition to that, the trusted adult came up quite often in the findings. Michelle indicated most students simply need a soft space to land. She elaborated that is usually a person. Sometimes it is Miss Hattie who works in the dining hall, who every time she sees them, she checks in and she has a genuine conversation like, how are your finals going, baby? Miss Hattie ain't never taken a college class ever, but she actually talks to these students, right? And then Truth also shared her belief in the importance of having the trusted adult. It can be that person in the office that we connected with when they first got there, or it is that one faculty member who's doing that really specific research that they got super jazzed about. And that person really connects to them, to their network and their resources, and follows up with them and makes sure that they are well. And they kind of take that under their wing. That is the person that gets them across the finish line. And lastly, when asked about the trusted adult, there were participants who named that their CBO staff were the solution to students being able to graduate. And so when speaking to Erin, who's a founding program director from New Orleans, shared, they name us, the CBO. A lot of them said having a community and feeling like they belong. You know, we get a lot of the, I would not have done this without you. Students need somebody in their corner and not just money. You can't just throw a check at them. If you're going to write a check, they need adequate coaching. We didn't do it for them. They did it. They own their own success. We just help them see that it is possible. Woo! Those are the findings. A lot of information, trying to take a quick breather, and then I'll take us home through the last bit of the conclusion. Thumbs up if everyone is still with me. Okay, wonderful. All righty. Okay, so regrounded us into 3 themes. Again, CBO staff felt value in professional development and training to both understand and support their students and families. CBO staff support students through various challenges and barriers, specifically navigating racial climates, specifically navigating PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and mental health. And then lastly, CBO described that the secret sauce to completion is the ability for students to create that sense of belonging by building some form of community. And for this study, that sense of belonging community was really built through affinity groups, cultural centers, and having that trusted adult on campus. And so I'm going to take us through really quickly how these findings align to the research questions. So if you remember, there were 2 research questions that we talked about at the beginning. Just to name research question 1, that is, how do staff describe their experience? All 3 themes aligned to research question 1. Obviously, they described their experience in the enabling conditions that they needed. They described their experience in participating in professional development. And they described their experience in really being able to understand a student's lived experience. When it came to research question 2, that's aligned to Yoso's theoretical framework, what are the forms of cultural wealth that they identified as valuable? For the first one, in regards to really understanding the student lives experience, that is super connected to navigational, linguistic, and familial capital. So navigational capital is the skills and abilities to navigate a social institution. And so participants, again, are really helping students navigate the institution, or giving them support in them being able to navigate. And then linguistic and familial are really what the student has in regards to social and personal human resources and family members, and being able to communicate to them. And so participants really weighed heavily in understanding that, and tapped into those cultural forms of cultural wealth to really be able to help students. Similar for theme 2, answered research question 1, obviously describing their lived experiences, supporting students through those challenges. And then also theme 2 with research question 2 gave a very depth descriptions of how supporting these students through challenges were essential to their progress and essential to them completing and getting to the finish line. And so that showed up in aspirational and navigational capital. Aspirational capital is the ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future. So students really being able to, in the midst of navigating a PWI, in the midst of mental health, still being able to aspirationally navigate the institution of higher education. And then theme 3, again, research question 1, how they describe their experience. So they describe their experience of the secret sauce by sense of belonging, building community through affinity groups, and a trusted adult, as how they describe their lived experience, really helping students get through that. And then for research question 2 around the forms of cultural wealth, really, again, leaned into navigational and then specific social, right? So social capital is defined as students, peers, and other social networks, and emphasizes how students utilize these to be successful. So students really utilizing affinity groups, cultural centers, their own CBO, trusted adults on campus. All of that is a social network that students are able to use and did use to really get through the finish line, and social networks that participants identified and connected them with so that they were able to succeed throughout their post-secondary journey. So implications, what does this mean for policy and practice in regards to CBOs? This means that CBOs really need to, if they don't already, have a professional development opportunities, have a professional development policies and practices that are within the CBO, so that more CBO staff don't feel like they have to always look externally for those opportunities. In addition, partnerships with institutions of higher education are super key to success and being able to cultivate relationships with those key stakeholders that are on campus. In addition, cultivating relationships outside of admissions. We tend to think about admissions and enrollment as the first phase, which they are, but there's also value as a community-based organization to have additional relationships with individuals that are on campus. And of course, incorporating family engagement opportunities. There were quite a few participants who mentioned their ability or not ability to really connect with families and how that holds value in their student success. So again, creating solutions based on what is working versus what is not. How do we take this new information and build initiatives and practices around what is actually helping students succeed, as opposed to a deficit-based model, which can mean like, what are the things that they're not doing, et cetera. Again, implications for higher education, access to mental health professionals and resources on campuses are key. Students need these opportunities more than ever these days. And so, for example, a wait list of 3 months to see a counselor is just simply unacceptable. So institutions really need to ensure that they have these professionals and services on campus. Partnerships, ensuring that institutions of higher ed are partnering with their local K through 12 districts and their local community-based organizations that are feeding thousands of students to their institution, and then ensuring that they actually do have these safe spaces on campuses. Do they have the affinity groups, cultural centers, and how do we ensure that students always know where they are? And how do we ensure that CBO organizational leaders also know who those individuals and where those centers are located? Limitations. So the limitations in my study, obviously the dissertation is the pepperoni to the pizza. You cannot cover everything. As many of you guys know me, I tried to attempt to cover everything, but I had an amazing committee who reined me in. And so my limitations were as followed. As mentioned before, I had predominantly females or individuals that identified as female who were part of the study. So that's a limitation. We didn't get as much of individuals that identified as male to get their perspective, which is super important. Imaginative variation, which is that one of the key steps in the data analysis of Moustakas. I didn't particularly use this step. This step is in regards to really looking at the findings potentially in a new perspective or a new theoretical model. I had already chosen Yoso's model, so didn't need to use imaginative variation. COVID-19, I didn't address the pandemic during my interview, something that we could have addressed, right? And so really understanding potentially what does support look like pre-COVID versus post-COVID, something to think about obviously when I get to future research, but didn't address COVID in particular. And then the geographic regions of CBOs, right? We were able to get a lot of data across 10 states, which is phenomenal, but obviously there were certain parts of the country that we didn't hear from. So future research, with all of that said, obviously there's an opportunity to dive super deep into community-based organizations and all of the things that they do. So whether that's looking at a case study instead of a phenomenology, right? How do you really look at maybe 2 to 3 community-based organizations in your area, dissecting them about their program model, their service offerings, and how that impacts students. So that's always an opportunity for future research. another phenomenology study with more male participants to really get that male perspective. There's a lot of conversation around minority males in particular in higher education. So that's an opportunity. Exploring current CBO and higher education partnerships that exist and really understanding how they exist, why they exist, what's coming out of those partnerships. And then other opportunities to really look at Yoso's model from students that may not be pursuing always four-year degrees. So what do those 6 cultural capitals mean for a student that is going directly to a 2-year community college or going to a technical program and then going directly to the workforce? How does that model still apply to that institution, that social institution of higher education? So I will pause. This is the end of my presentation. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. I know it was a lot of information. It was a lot of work, and I feel really thrilled to be able to share that with all of you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chantelle.
So I will stop sharing screen so I can actually see everyone. Hi.
Well, a couple of things. One, great presentation, a lot of material covered, so great presentation. And also let the record reflect, at one point you had 60 people on the call. We have faculty senate meetings that don't have 60 people. So, I mean, you are part of a conversation that clearly a lot of people are excited about. So your research matters. That's first. That's the first thing that clearly there's an issue there. So I'll start off by just asking you a pretty straightforward question, and it's not going to surprise you. First, the professional, the practice part of you knows the field because you're doing the work. So what about the dissertation process and understanding the broader field and the research? How is that impacted, or how do you think it will impact your practice, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Full transparently, I came into the dissertation process, again, trying to be as unbiased as possible because I am someone that is in the field. I assumed finances was going to be the #1 answer to the secret sauce question. I was convinced everyone was going to say it's money, students need money. And probably the 9th interview, no one said money. And so that is, money is important, but that was not the first thing that came. And so that was super interesting and continued to be really interesting to me throughout the dissertation process. So I would share after this study and going into the field, really understanding how we think about the money, right? How do we think about funding, but also how do we really, really build initiatives around the other things that students need, which is from this study, right? Social support, emotional support, trainings that individuals need to actually have, being culturally competent in those trainings. And so those were a few pieces that I pulled out directly to be able to actually put into practice sooner than later.
You know, the administrative part of me, especially the higher ed administrative part of me, when you start talking to me about things that we need to do to address a challenge that don't necessarily start with money, I get excited. So that's interesting. We're going to hear that. So that's great. The last question I asked before I open up to the committee is also probably not going to surprise you. The whole purpose of the dissertation is that you're answering a question. Okay, so what would you argue is the unique, distinct contribution that your research makes to the literature?
Yeah, I think the unique contribution is looking at completion of these students in an asset-based way, right? So instead of thinking about here's what they didn't do, or here's why they dropped out, and here's what we need to do because of that, it's like, no, there are students, like many of us on this call, I also identify as a student of color or low-income Pell eligible, free reduced lunch, the whole 9 yards, who was successful, right? And so the biggest thing to add is there are thousands of students like us who have completed, and we should know their stories and we should understand the why behind that. I also want to push around higher ed and even policymakers and funders who may potentially be on the call as well, is that when we write those grants, when we are trying to get funding and we're using student stories, right? Every student doesn't have a sad story. Every student every Black student is not low income. Every Black student is not first gen, right? So really being able to tell a diverse perspective and a diverse story to our students, and knowing that there are other things that they need outside of funding that we talk about, and not to bring that down higher ed is expensive. We know this. People do need scholarships, and I think it should be free, but that's a whole different dissertation. But nevertheless, I would share that's the one big piece I'm bringing into the space is looking at the support that students are receiving outside of the institution. The National College Attainment Network had a benchmarking report around over 50% of high school juniors and seniors are a part of these CBOs, and they're only getting larger. So we cannot ignore the work that they're doing, and they're actually could add value to an institution. And so that would be some of the things I would really want higher education leaders to fully understand.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll open it up to the committee to ask questions. Okay, Dr. Clayton will be typing as you see from the message. So, Dr. Clayton, you wanna pop us off?
Or you want me to read the question, Dr. Clayton? Okay. Dr. Clayton is a little bit under weather, so that's why she's dropped it in the chat. She said, I understand why you chose not to do Imagine. My first. Oh, okay. From the dissertation, the participants. Yeah, so there are 16 participants. There's a chance a table might not have made it, but it should have. But there were 16 participants total in the dissertation. 100%. Thanks for that clarity. Okay. Yes, thank you, Dr. Clayton. I will double check the table around that, but there should be 16. Great question. So I opted not to do paragraphs for each participant. I instead created a table that has, and I didn't show the table today, team, but what they're referring to, there's a massive table that has all of the participant information, who they are, what they identified as, what geographic region that they're coming from. And so instead of doing paragraphs for each participant, this is something Dean Mitchell and I spoke about as well. We felt confident about the information that was in the table. And then also in the findings, I introduced each person as to, here is Nina, who's a student success coach from Chicago, because we were really focused on what they actually have done with students as opposed to and understanding who they are in particular, but felt we had enough information with the table, and then also with being able to introduce them before they gave the particular quote in chapter 4. Dr. Curry, I got your note. Let me.
Got it. Okay, it works now.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Sorry,
Thank you.
let me try to unmute everyone. Okay.
Okay, it looks like Keith had the same problem. Okay. All right, so okay. I think Dr. Clayton was still.
Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Curry, please feel free.
All right, so I wanted to commend you on the YASO adding that kind of the graph that you did, or the figure that really helped. And then when you took out the anti-deficit framework, that was good because it was confusing. It was like, is this part of the theoretical framework, or is it had, and I know we had gone through that feedback. So that whole section was cleaner. And then adding in Bourdieu as sort of like, here's the seminal work that adds into what YASO has. I wanted to just let you know that really cleaned up all that. And then it helps when you get to the end through chapter 5. So I think all the way through, it made the whole document cleaner. So fixing that in chapter 2 was good. I had a concern that was not really about your writing, but about something brought up by a participant, and it was Faith. And she brings up this mental health issue, which we're all seeing, of course. And I think maybe contextualizing a bit about that, you know, here we are post-pandemic. when you started this data collection. And then she's bringing up some really serious mental health issues. And this is the second theme. And it's a sub theme of the second theme. So she brings up the mental health issues, and she's talking about, anxiety and depression. Those are the top two mental health concerns that we see for all students. But then she goes into people who are being diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. And one of the things that I think happens a lot, and I don't just think it's found in literature, is that students of color are more likely to be identified with more severe mental health disorders. And this is part of a systemic racial discrimination that we know happens in mental health. So then on top of maybe feeling uncomfortable going to get mental health services, when students do go, they tend to be overdiagnosed with very severe mental health disorders. And so because that happens, then on top of that, they tend to be over medicated. And so that's also like a piece of this process that could be unpacked more, I think, in chapter 5. And so it's really hard for people who are working in these sorts of roles to know, if they have not had that kind of training, to know like how to help someone navigate. I mean, did students have schizophrenia? I don't even know. Like, you could just have a mental health breakdown because you're away from home for the first time, and somebody call it something really severe like that. I don't know. I'm always really cautious to say if a 21-year-old has or 20-year-old, 19-year-old has a really severe disorder like schizophrenia or bipolar, because a lot of times they're just having a nervous breakdown for for the stress that they're under. And we're in post-pandemic stress on top of that. So they could have PTSD. They could have, there could be all kinds of things. And then expecting someone to help navigate that feels like a lot to me. And we have people working in higher education who have no crisis and trauma training. They have no training to deal with basically trauma-informed care on top of all that. So my heart went out to Faith when she was like, I'm asking, like, do you feel comfortable in therapy? Can you do some meditation? Do you how is she supposed to navigate that? And that was just one person. So, that's happening. I know Franklin said he's on this call today. Franklin and I have talked about this so many times. He's probably like, oh, geez, yes, we talk about it. Like, every time we talk about it. So I really wanted to see that unpacked more, because you get $500 to go to PD. You're grateful for the $500, but you're going to do the thing that you maybe do every day when these crises don't necessarily pop up every day, but you would need that training. So if there was any way to unpack that one more, and I might have even wanted to see some more quotes from other participants, because you allude to other participants in that area.
Yeah.
But this one, and I know it's because I'm a counselor, this one really, I struggled with this one, because we have so many students that are on wait lists for a month or two just to even get into mental health services. So
100%.
I would even link that maybe in chapter 5 to some statistics about the number of students who struggle with anxiety and depression. There's no way students aren't struggling with that. So these CBOs, how would they even deal with that if they don't have training?
Thank you, Dr. Curry. Appreciate that. I know there were some additional quotes in the dissertation, the whole dissertation, which has a ton of information. But thank you so much and I'm taking a note on what you just described. I agree.
Okay. Then the only other thing that when you got to the secret sauce, I was kind of like, yeah, sense of belonging. There's so much research on that. So you were kind of calling it the secret sauce. I know, like, you went back to Tinto, and for me, that totally made all the sense in the world, because I've seen so much literature on that. So I was kind of hoping to see you sort of pull in more on that in the chapter 5, like just some more articles that support. And here's other people who have found that same thing, particularly for these populations. So, like, for low income, for students of color, for students who are, if you do want to talk about first generation, I know you said you don't necessarily want to talk about that, but that whole like landing spot of sense of belonging, that's why we always are saying, like, yes, there's over 30,000 people at LSU, but we try to shrink that for them. And you know that I have a grant for students who are from low income. And that's the very first thing we do is try to shrink LSU. Because if we don't, it's really hard to make a connection. And if you don't make a connection, you may not stay.
Yeah. Super helpful, Dr. Curry. And absolutely, looked into Chantelle's model, talked about Chantelle in the literature review. Sense of belonging is nothing new to us. I think the emphasis was around specifically affinity groups and cultural centers, and then the trusted adult. And so I remember even going to Dean Mitchell maybe halfway through my interviews, because there were obviously a lot of people to interview. And I'm like, I know a lot about affinity groups, but the fact that it came up every single interview was both exciting and like, okay, they're really saying that not only sense of belonging, but specifically from these cultural centers and affinity groups that are actually on campus. And so it was a very specific thing that a lot of them are talking about. And so I wanted to make sure that that came off as like, yes, the secret sauce is sense of belonging, but specifically it was actually a magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, what's the one solution that you believe gets students across the finish line? What's the one solution or the secret sauce to post-secondary completion? And so in a roundabout way, it was students having community in campus, students feeling a sense of belonging, but it was specific of like, they need that one person that believes in them, and they need to find that community through peer groups, et cetera. And most of it was around affinity groups and cultural centers, but really appreciate your note. And I'm taking a note there to link some of that stuff in chapter 5 so that it's clear.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Problem. Keith, I tried to unmute you and I don't know if there we go.
Yeah.
Dr. Zander.
Thank you. Hi. Let me start with a comment and then I've got 3 questions for you. So first comment is, similar to Dr. Curry, it was a joy to read this final version and see how far you've come in terms of the level of clarity you have in your writing and in your presentation around the purpose of your study, where it fits in the literature, the broader field, and the sort of trifold way in which you discussed the implications. I thought was really powerful as well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the purpose of a dissertation and learning the skills of research and writing, it was a real joy to read this and see your progress on that front. So my first question is fairly straightforward, and it's around your participants. I was curious if you tracked the length of time the interview participant had been in their role. I noticed that was absent from the description, but I know based on my experience working in CBOs and really doing any job that the length of time that you've done something really has an impact on how you see it and perceive it and might talk about it. So yeah, I was curious if you tracked that, or if you didn't, if you saw even sort of informal patterns based on that variable.
Yes, great question. I did track that. I was actually looking for the note. And if it's not in the dissertation, I'm happy to add that. But I did ask in the interview, how long have you been in this particular role? So we had a range from newbies. So I've been in this role for 2 years, all the way till we had a person from Atlanta who had been in the role for almost 20 years. And so a wide variety of lengths of time was a part of that participant profile. And so got a good range of not only geographic regions, but also like the length of time that they were in these particular positions. So again, I just started, I'm a couple of years into, I've been doing this, a decade. So I'll put a note to ensure that that's in there as well. Oh, we need to unmute Dr. Zander, or maybe just try to figure out how to unmute everyone. I am terrible at technology, team. Dean Mitchell, I'll look to you. Let's see.
All right, I'm back.
Here we go.
That's helpful. So yeah, I would suggest including that in the dissertation. And if you did observe any patterns and responses based on length of experience, I think that'd be really valuable to include, especially in terms of how CBOs might internalize or interpret this data when you inevitably bring this to the broader field, as I hope you do. I think that would be really valuable context. Second, and it's along the same lines, in the literature review, I was glad to see a section on CBO effectiveness. I was surprised that it was fairly short, given the focus of this study and sort of the contribution to the literature being its focus on the CBO context and setting. And I know that there's a lot out there, sort of informally and formally, on CBO effectiveness. A lot of it is white papers and technical reports and not in the published literature. But I would encourage you to dig further into that sort of informal literature using your wonderful network. And even if you don't include it in the final dissertation, I think bringing that context to bear when you take this research on the road, so to speak, and begin to share it more broadly, it's going to be vital to bring a deep understanding of what other research has taken place within CBOs beyond just that NCAM benchmark study, which is great, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more out there that I think you can leverage and rely on. All right, my last question is sort of a two-parter, and it's around Yaso's framework. I know this wasn't explicitly like a validation study of that framework. You were using it as a conceptual framework and it's also a design input to your interview protocol. But I'm curious if, based on your experience and your analysis, if you have any recommendations around the design or the use of that framework in general, and specifically when being used in a research setting like this, to design interview protocols or survey, item instruments. So that's my first question around the framework. And then the other question around it is the flip side of that is, do you see any potential practical implications or use cases for Yaso's framework, right? To sort of take it out of this research world and maybe bring it more to the forefront of, the CBO audience, I think in particular. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to repeat either one of those questions if that's helpful. I know that was a mouthful.
Yeah, I may need you to repeat, but Yaso's model in particular, and so I think I'll answer the latter first. Yes, I do think there's opportunities to utilize more of this model potentially in the CBO space and potentially in other spaces as well. So when we dive deep into those 6 forms of wealth, I could argue that you could choose one form of cultural wealth and kind of go down a rabbit hole of, like, when we think about family engagement, right? Familial support, familial capital has its own thing. Navigational capital has its own thing. And then specifically when we think about community-based organizations that are knee deep in anti-racist movements and culturally competency movements, right? When we think about that resistance capital, which I didn't get too much into with this particular study, but it is around how students are disrupting what's happening at the system and at the systems level, specifically at institutions. And so the answer is yes. I do see a world where we could incorporate the model. I do see a world where, and even in my conversations with Dr. Yaso, she was very adamant about also the historical piece that I didn't touch on in my dissertation, but for example, like, what is it about Chicago and why did Chicago create ex-CBO, right? What's the historical context of Minnesota? What's happening? What are the systems and structures happening in Louisiana where the state or whomever felt a need to create this CBO at this particular state? So that historical context is another lens, Dr. Zander, that I think we could delve deep into that from both a CBO perspective and also from an institution perspective. And I think I may need you to repeat the first question.
Yeah, it was basically the flip side of that question, but for research, right? So if you were going to talk to another researcher who was going to use Yaso's framework, maybe especially in this type of context or study, do you have any recommendations or reflections around the validity of the framework after using it extensively? Would you make any changes, adjustments, any cautions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have any questions around the validity of the model. I think the model has been validated several times in many of the research and many of her articles in particular. I would say that my caution is around, even again, in really understanding like cultural capital versus cultural wealth, right? So cultural wealth is a capital, but it's that means, and that's why I added the quote to really get to that means by which her and I spoke about a lot, because it's the vehicle that gets students, or the vehicle that is helping students understand understanding their capital. So it's different from a Purdue model, which is saying that like students that are coming from higher socioeconomic status or have access to social or somewhat, you know, in or at an advantage than those that may not have access to that. Whereas Yoso is saying, no, students of color have these cultural capitals already. It's just a matter of them understanding that they have them and how do they navigate and use them at an institution. And so I would push those to really think about, it's not saying, oh, you have resistance capital or you have aspirational capital and the rest of you don't. It's like you actually all have this. And as this, for example, the CBO as the vehicle or as the institution as the vehicle, let me try to get a student to understand what they have and how they need to use this as they're navigating the post-secondary experience.
Great, super helpful. And I'd encourage you to find an opportunity, if you can, to layer in what you just voiced over into section 5 of the dissertation. I think that would really help strengthen. Great work.
Dr. Roberts, I believe we were able to unmute you as well. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
He is my
as well.
phenomenology expert. He is my phenomenology expert.
Awesome job. Yeah, I just wanted to praise you. I think you did a great job overall in the dissertation, and I'm really excited to see all the methods and read through those. It's definitely grown a lot. So great job in that regard. Yeah, my major questions was similar to what you've just kind of been talking to, was that theoretical perspective that you brought into the study, Yoso's model. It seems like a really cool fit. But do you think, like, you know, like all kind of social science studies are wanting to really build theory, advance theory, you know what I mean? Like, are there elements that you think need to be added to this model moving forward? I know you kind of got into that a little bit, but it seems like, you know, some of these touch on pieces of what your themes are, but maybe that core, like, true essence, I think, is about belonging. I don't know that it's truly fully represented in the model as Yoso kind of articulated it. So do you think that could be something that could be fleshed out further?
Yes, that's a great question. I agree, and I think it could be fleshed out further, specifically looking at social capital. I feel like social capital is the form of wealth that directly aligns to social connections and social networks, which is the trusted adult, which is affinity groups. And so that particular form of wealth, I think, is directly aligned and could go down deeper into really aligning the findings into what does that mean for social wealth for students, et cetera. So that would be the piece that that I would add on to that, around really just looking at that one framework. I think the second form of cultural wealth that I didn't go too deep into is the familial piece, right? So there were a lot of conversations with participants. Obviously, I couldn't talk about everything, but there were a lot of conversations around family, right? So how does family play a part in a student's journey? Specifically, if you're Latinx and you're the only person in your family who speaks English, right? And so those things came up a little bit, which kind of, you know, had the light bulb around what does familial capital look like for certain students as they're navigating PWIs or minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions, et cetera. So I think familial and social for this study in particular could be two areas to really go down a rabbit hole, if you so to speak, around this.
Yeah, and I also have wondered, as I was kind of reading through your dissertation, this navigational capital, it seems to, like, all of these pieces seem to feed into that more largely. And so I wonder, I like the model, but I wonder if it's not an outcome of the models being able to navigate in your particular context, you know what I mean? And that may be, you know, like the coalescing of all of these different factors may lead to this ability to navigate the social system and lead to success. And so I wonder if that may be something to think about and pose as an implication, and, you know, do some follow-up investigations as well with. And then, you know, like something else that you may think about is, what are some of those really deep categories in terms of cultural capital that was expressed, and what are maybe some of those more shallow areas that need to be researched further to be understood so that they can be further articulated? I think that could be kind of fleshed out maybe in chapter 5 just a tad more, and, you know, talking about, like, you know, like all of these are needed obviously, but at different levels for different individuals, all that kind of stuff. In this particular context, what is the meat and potatoes though, and what do we need to do a better job in terms of support, resources, that kind of stuff, so that they can begin to navigate this and kind of utilize and pull from this larger cultural capital lens. So I think there is some definitely cool conversations and thoughts about it. But I was also really thinking theoretically as I got to the end and what this means and what this looks like and how do we kind of talk about and articulate that a little bit more. So I think just putting a little bit more thought into that piece of what your study means and how do we begin to continue to add to that theory could be really, really neat overall. My next question was just, you did a great job with these interviews. How were your data really triangulated outside of interview data, though?
Say it again. How was what?
How are your data triangulated outside of just your interviews? Like, did you do some observations? Like, what are some other ways that we were able to really, kind of validate your findings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not do observations. If you remember from the proposal, I thought about the part 2 of, after interviews, I'm going to choose 5 people and potentially go in the field with them to look at students, which is an amazing part 2 of this dissertation. But once I realized the volume of interviews that I had, and I was going to reach data saturation probably at number 10, I just opted not to do a phase 2 of that. But I do think that it is a necessary phase 2 to potentially look at the student perspective. So the students that these individuals served and really being able to observe potentially an advising session or a coaching session. So that's where I was with that.
Definitely. All right. Those are my questions. Thank you. And great job overall. Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you. So any further questions from the committee? So if a donor comes up with $5 million and wants to develop a CBO success program, what 2-3 elements would you definitely want to include? I love these questions.
Yeah, I love the great question, Dr. Clayton. If we had all the money in the world, we could create the whole program. One is first looking at who are the adults that are going to support these students, right? And so that begins with hiring practices and all of that, but ensuring that those individuals are, one, culturally competent, they understand the experiences of the students that they are connecting with. And so my CBO would focus on a to and through line. So from the access to the completion to the employment. So I would love to have something that is completely through, because we also know that there's a lot of literature around students who don't get jobs after they complete. So the CBO would be a to, through and through, and really focusing on first the training. So ensuring those individuals have adequate training and they are prepared to actually support students on campus. The second element would be that direct partnership connections. I'm an avid believer, and I believe this study also showed the importance of really connecting and how collaboration is important in this field. So what does that collaboration look like for the post-secondary institution and potentially also the employer whose students are going to receive a job for post? And the third would be the family piece. I would love if anyone on this call wants to talk after about who is actually doing really effective family engagement. I would love to know. Family engagement comes up quite often. And there are some, but it is usually the thing that students really depend on. Of course, who is the first person outside of a teacher that they're really going to get information from? It's what's happening at home. As they are navigating institutions, some of the participants also mentioned the conversations that they would have with families around, I actually don't want my daughter to go far away. I actually, depending on the culture, the student may be getting married before they go off to college. So that family engagement would be the third element I would really drill down on, and getting experts, to Dr. Curry's point, to getting experts and professionals who really understand mental health, who really understand the importance of the family and how they play a part, not only just getting their student or their kid into post-secondary education, but how does a family be an active role all the way through the end and into that employment piece. Hope Chicago is a really good example of how they're incorporating parents as well. And so that would be a model that I would highly consider with 5 million. Thank you. Got it.
Needs to be added to the recommendations. Okay, so any other questions from the committee? Okay, could y'all hang around for just 1 second while the committee goes to a breakout room and we spend some time talking? If possible, please stick around. I promise you, we won't be long. So
Thank you.
Super exciting, Chantelle. Congratulations. You did so great. Everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Mariana, supporting Chantelle here and calling in from Chicago.
Thanks. Now I can see some of you. I only could see 3 people. I think some of the committee is still in and we're going to move to breakout sessions soon.
I'm so excited. I have to calm down.
Yeah, I'm over here rooting for you.
There we go. I
to
see you,
call.
Dr.
Drop it
Fields.
right.
I see you, Dr. Fields. Now I can see people. There we go. I see. Come on, Zoom backgrounds.
Yes. Are we ready? Are we ready?
Dr. Owen, so great to see you. She's coming from San Diego State. Great to see you. Dr. Teamer, great to see you as well. Great to see you as well. Hi, everybody. Oh, y'all, these lashes got to stay on now. These lashes. Thank you so much for staying on. I know this is a long amount of time to hear me spill about 2.5 years of work. And hopefully it was informative and supportive of those of you that are in the work. And those of you that are like, I don't even know what a phenomenology is. Well, now you have another tool or another word to say in your arsenal. Dr. Ray, come through. Mentor since college. Oh my goodness, so good to see you. Oh my goodness, so many great people. Yay. Thank y'all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. This has been a long, a journey. A journey. And it looks like I have some follow-ups on this dissertation. So we're not on the way completely done, but we're almost there. We're almost at the finish line.
Yeah, 90%, right?
Yeah,
Almost. If you start the countdown.
I know everything has to be into the grad school by April 5th. So everything has to be in by then.
Okay, sounds great. Lots of love for you in the chat too. Make sure you're reading the
Yeah,
chat.
see.
Save your transcript of your chat.
Carisha's coming from Atlanta. Hi, Judy. I see you, Judy. Pahara Institute in the house. Oh, I see. Okay, I see a ton of folks. CGC's in the house. Goldman Sachs cohort is in the house. LSU alum, sorority sisters, family. Again, really appreciate it, team. It is an exciting day. Now I feel like I can breathe a little.
Yay, that's great.
So much anxiety this week. You put your heart and soul into a study and you hope it lands. You hope it lands. And then, of course, you guys know me. I'm like, I want to talk about all the things. And then you're like, no, you only have 30 minutes. Oh, thanks. Thanks, best friend.
Oh,
Come on,
that's so
best friend from
sweet.
Lafayette. 20 years. 20
I
years.
love that.
How's life, everybody? How's your Friday?
Yes, we made it. We're here for you. I was just going to ask, how are you feeling? What are the words that come to mind?
Oh, I can't unmute. Are y'all on mute? Wait. Oh, God.
No, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Can people unmute? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
I just hear Mariana. I'm like, is Mariana the only one that has permission to talk?
No.
Because I've been
I'm
trying
so
to figure
excited.
out.
I love that background too, that you have the congratulations, Chantelle background.
Oh, you want to hold on? I'll put it in the chat
She can
right
drop it in
now.
the chat.
Yes, I can.
We have swag. I think we have
sure
a post
do.
swag.
We
On
do.
brand too.
Yes, always. If you haven't
on.
yet, I just put the background in the chat if you want to download it.
Thank you, Mariana.
Yes, of
Shout out
course.
to the team. I navigated all of this, team and running a business at the same time. For those of y'all who don't know, I started the PhD in CGC literally at the same time. So it's been a double-headed monster for the past 4 years. And want to thank Lindora Johnson, I think is on the call. Mariana, Larita, a ton of folks from the team who are Skyping in, who have pretty much managed my company while I got through dissertation. So I appreciate you guys so much. We may have some folks from Costa Rica. I see Venice on the call. Rachel may be on the call. I also took a sabbatical and wrote most of this dissertation out of the country, which was an amazing opportunity. But so good to see all of you, and I really appreciate you guys sticking around and waiting for this result with me. Thank you, Nicole. So for the record, I could hear the like ding ding, the like ding ding when
We
people
couldn't
come
be
in.
worried
we
about that. I
were.
was like, oh, I hope she doesn't shake up Chantelle. I said, but she's
I had
slaying.
to
This
like,
looks amazing. But
that's why I tried to do my
yeah.
little note. I was like, how do you get that thing to stop
I knew you
doing
were thinking
that?
it. I could see it. I could see
At
it.
one point, y'all know I was about to go full my mom, like, don't let him in. I was about to pull a full Deborah moment. Shut it off. But I just had to like stay focused and keep going because I didn't want to waste up too much time.
No, you did great. You didn't like even skip a beat. I was
know
losing it
people
for
about
you,
to
but
say
you
shit at
did
that.
it. Right. All right, that last one I just posted is the actual official one. You'll see the CGC
You,
logo in the
Mariana.
corner. Yeah, of course. So excited for you. Dr. Fields, I just sent it to you too. Yeah.
Dr. Paris Woods, I see you. So Dr. Paris Woods and I, we met Dr. Yoso at the same time. And we both were sitting at a conference and she was on a panel and we both looked at each other. I was like, is that Yoso? It's like, is that her? And we beelined to meet her. And she is incredible and has been super supportive. And I'm hoping with after this is over, potentially her and I can do some collaborative work together because her model I thought was super interesting. I hadn't heard of her model until I really started looking at theoretical frameworks. And I thought it was just really important for us to talk about the asset base of our students. All of you, most of you, I'm looking around, are all in the field. And I'm like, hey, there are some students who complete, who get there, who get to the finish line. And how do we talk more about their stories? Because they do exist.
Chantelle, I took so many notes on work that's already out there. I just have to tell you, and that
yes,
asset-based versus deficit-based frameworks. I mean, we really need to do that with a lot of the institutions that we serve. And it's interesting, I put in the chat, when we talk about the funders, it's interesting that a lot of times the funders are asking our institutions to get letters of support from CBOs, but there really isn't a relationship between the CBOs in a holistic way that could benefit the students. And then the other thing that kept coming to mind is bias training on both sides as you went through. So I literally, you and I will talk offline because
we have to talk. Come on, Dr. Teamer, I'm ready. I'm ready. Yes. To your point, absolutely. All the training. And then the other, and this, y'all may have gone down a rabbit hole in committee, forgive me, but the last thing I will share is, as I mentioned, the workforce, right, is a big conversation, career readiness, ensuring students are ready to get these jobs, but also are employers ready to receive Gen Z and Black and Brown students that may be coming into oil and gas or manufacturing or whatnot. So that's a whole nother training piece that I don't think really exists.
Remind me to send you the invite to Where Are the Workers?
Okay. Yes, Dr. Teamer, we will be in touch. I'm excited about collaborative work with you. Dr. Teamer team is based out of New Orleans, but does work across the nation in institutional effectiveness and is amazing. And so thank you so much for coming. I'm really looking forward to some things that we can shake up here in Louisiana.
Yeah. What's interesting is that you just said our employers are ready for Gen Z to come, and that was a conversation I was having this week. So next time you're in Houston, because that is very much so accurate. And I feel like you need to be in conversation with those employers who are looking for people so they can be well informed of like exactly, the type of employee they're working with.
And the other piece is looking
I tell you what, I don't
chamber.
want to cut the conversation short, but I mean, there's a reason that we're here. I don't want us to bury the lead. So
the debrief is still happening.
I will borrow some wise words from Dr. Zander. He said in some cases, dissertation defenses or dissertations are an exercise in the process, like literally, do you understand how to conduct research? And then in other times they're, exercises in that, but also what's the impact on the field? The conversation that we're having right here proves, Chantelle, that you did both. You conducted incredible research, but then also we're already having that conversation as we speak about how the field is going to be impacted. So with that being said, first of all, let me be first in front of all of these folks to congratulate you, Dr. George, on an incredible defense and an incredible process. You have done well, and it brings me quite incredibly good joy. And also, it's worth noting, all of the LSU alums, former professors, friends, family. I see sorority and fraternity family, Divine Nine folks. It's a lot of people here professionally and personally that are here to support you. So congratulations, friend. Congratulations. Job well done.
Guys, thank you. Thank you so much. I am overwhelmed. I'm still trying to keep my eyelashes on, so y'all bear with me. But again, super supportive. I have to thank this incredible committee. As you guys can see, the amazing, talented, brilliant individuals. I was so adamant about assembling brilliant people who would challenge me. And then also folks that I highly respect in the field. Dr. Clayton was the first faculty member I ever met. But we had coffee before I even stepped foot into this program, and she was outstanding. And then I got to teach with Dr. Curry throughout, and gave me that experience to be able to do collegiate level teaching, which I was so adamant about. And Dr. Roberts has become my new best friend, my new phenomenology buddy, who I bugged and harassed throughout December to really understand Moustakis and some of these words I could not even pronounce, but now I feel like I know what I'm talking about. And Dr. Zander and I.
So space out. We are taking the exam today. We are all taking.
Oh, Lewis, go on mute, please. Go on mute.
Take your cell phone, tuck it. Take your cell phone.
Lewis Morris teaching. And Dr. Zander, we've been BFF for a very long time. And so I really appreciate you, and someone who's also in the field as well, and who has transitioned from CBO and now at the Gates Foundation. So hopefully you can take back some things to the Gates Foundation that you heard today. And really thank you for supporting. Dean Mitchell, you have been my anchor. I appreciate you more than you know. Just being able to work near you and close to you, and learning what it means to be a dean, if that's something I ever decide to step into. But I really appreciate you and your support, and all my harassing emails and text messages that have happened over the past 2 weeks. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I was on, and I had another Zoom I was on that I stopped to join it for. So I was like, maybe we just do phone instead. Let me try Justin to see if
Olivia on mute. Thank you. Everyone on mute. Thanks, team. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who may not be on camera. I love you. I love you. To my family, my friends, my supportive, my College Beyond folks. I see you. I love you as well. If I'm missing anyone, I'm sorry, but I am overwhelmed with gratitude. And May 18th, we are walking. We
Dr.
are
George,
walking.
you know how your
Dr.
committee works
George.
too. You know how your committee works. You know how your committee works. So we have some things that we're going to work on to get you to the finish line.
Yeah.
But you did incredible work. We see the contribution that you're doing, and we got great feedback. So I have some feedback that I'll be providing you. The committee also will be forwarding you some information directly. Anything else, committee members? Is there anything that you'd like to share with Dr. George?
So happy for you. Congratulations. I hope you do something really fun and celebratory for yourself today.
Thank you, Dr. Curry.
All right, good friends.
All righty, team.
Chantelle, celebrate your friends. Yeah. Celebrate yourself now. Celebrate you.
I will. I will.
Go, Chantelle.
Yes.
Dr. George. Congratulations. Woo-woo.
Congratulations. Let the turn up begin. Let the turn up begin.
Chantelle, I hope you got a screenshot of the group.
Wait, I want to get a screenshot. Oh, okay. Mariana,
take another one.
We got it covered.
Real quick. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Got it.
Girls in there, Chantelle, today.
Oh, Dean Mitchell, when you stop recording, just make sure we have it. Perfect. Thank you. Bye, everyone. I appreciate it. I love y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Girls on the screenshot. Bye.